You're listening to the Valley Current.
Hey, David, how have you been? You look great.
Well, so do you, Jack. How are you doing?
Pretty good. You look like you've actually lost weight and have no gray hair. What happened? Did you do something special?
Well, I've been working out and biking like a crazy man for 3 years, so that could have something to do with it. So much that now I have to see a physical therapist so I don't hurt myself.
It looks like you're thin and athletic. I believe you probably have been doing a lot of biking in the last 3 years that I haven't seen you.
Yeah, it's been, I've probably put on, 7,000 miles in that time. I mean, it's just been like all the time. I just decided, I can't sit around anymore. I got to do something. So
let me tell you
something. If I lived out where you are, if I lived out in California, I could be outside all the time. I got to spend 6 months doing it in my basement, here.
Right, 'cause you're in Minnesota, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's we got to just hunker down. We this year we had double hunker down with our COVID plus the freezing cold at the same time. I mean, by January we're all just like, okay, we're just hermits living in under in a hole,
You just got out of the winter in May. You're just surviving the winter right now, right?
Oh yeah, I was camping with my kid 2 weeks ago. No, not even. It was like a week ago up north. And it was 28 degrees and snowing when we woke up. I mean, that's April, that's kind of unusual actually, even for Minnesota, but we were like, whatever, that's how it is here,
I know. And I should tell you something. I am a big biking enthusiast, but I've gotten to that point in my life where having an electric bike with the electric assist really does change the game. And they have some really super sleek bikes that don't weigh like, a ton. And they literally do zoom, and you do still pedal, but it is quite different than having a non-electric bike.
I'm out there sometimes working my ass off, like really, really pedaling. And somebody will just zip past me. And I'm like, there's no way that that's just totally their legs.
These electric bikes get you up to like 30 miles an hour.
Yeah, it's insane. That's insane.
Fast.
That's very
really
fast.
I mean, on a bike. I think if you are really good and you're pedaling like a standard kind of racing bike, if you're going 20 or 22 miles an hour, that's pretty fast.
Yeah, that's what I'm usually at, as much as I can be when there's not traffic. And but once in a while you'll be going downhill and you'll be going 30 miles, 30, even more sometimes. And you go like, wow, this would be dangerous,
So I should tell you, I have had a podcast with a professor of medicine from Stanford who did the cross-country 40-day biking trip nonstop every day, logging in about 100 miles.
Wow.
From San Francisco to DC or somewhere else.
Wow.
It's the ocean to ocean, 40 consecutive days with the same group of people. I mean, obviously there's a van that's following them and they do go and sleep in hotels at night, but they put in like 12 to 15 hours a day.
Insane.
And I'll tell you, he said, you had to eat at least 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And like just consuming that food was a major part of getting through the whole thing, but he loved it. It's one of
the big attractions for me to biking every day, which I pretty much do, is that I can then eat whatever I want, pretty much, and drink not as much beer as I want, but it's, you can drink a few beers and the whole thing is like canceled out by the biking,
So let's welcome you into the Valley Current podcast, because I've wanted you to come on ever since I took your class at the University of Nevada Law School years ago, because you presented a great class about how lawyers are storytellers. And of course, we've always believed that. And NITO, who you were teaching for, the National Institute of Trial Advocates, is very much into storytelling. Yeah. And you have a company that focuses now not only on lawyers doing storytelling, but business people doing storytelling, and you've rebranded it. So tell us a little bit about first your journey, about how you got there, because I remember you were an actor years ago, if I'm remembering your history, or you taught acting or both, right?
Yeah, all of that. Yeah, my foundation is in theater, and it's more than acting, really. It's acting, writing, and directing. And the writing and directing has been more what has informed me in teaching people about storytelling for law and for business than the acting. The acting is more of a receptive, kind of a almost passive storytelling, because you're telling someone else's story. You know, you're giving it life,
right?
But you're not really constructing the story, or that's the director and the playwright do that.
Right.
So in my capacity as those two things, it's been, the objective is to engage the audience as quickly and as deeply as possible. And you only have one chance. I mean, you can't say like, hey, come back 3 more times and so you can really get the story. No, it's one time, So that's really where it all started for me. And it turns out that, all of life can really be a theater if you make it that way,
But you do a great job, because you're one of the few people I know that will roll up their sleeves and take like 20 deposition transcripts and 5,000 pages of exhibits and just go through it and say, look, the essential story is, and then there's a one-liner, and you deliver that one-liner, and I'm sure you must shock the lawyers and business people that you can sift through all that information and find that exact point that's going to get people's attention.
Yeah, people really, whether they're in business or law, they're human beings, and human beings tend to get lost in details, and they start to lose track of the fact that everyone isn't in their head already. Like we love to talk to ourselves.
Yes.
We love to talk to people who we feel have the same vocabulary and experience and background that we have. So we can just talk to ourselves. Life would be amazing if everybody was around you was just little yous everywhere,
Right.
And you wouldn't have to worry about messaging or storytelling, really, because, and the weird thing is though we know that's not happening, we tend to just act like it's happening all the time.
Right.
So I work with, when I work with business people, I don't have to read all the depositions and stuff, but I got to figure out what in the world their product or service really is. People who come to me to work with me on that are usually IT or tech or professional services that have 16 different facets. Financial services work with me quite a bit because it's hard to explain simply.
Right.
And I have to understand it first myself, and then I have to imagine that I'm one of their potential customers and go, well, now this potential customer doesn't know anything.
Right.
What do they really want to know first? And basically, they want to know, how are you going to help me? They don't want to know what you do. They want to know how you're going to help them.
Right.
And that's the most counterintuitive thing in the world for most business owners. So I help them with that.
Do you think business people on the whole are just bad at delivering what you might call the sort of elevator pitch? Business people just are bad at that. Like they're good at a lot of things, but they're just bad at what Madison Avenue is really good at. Because whenever I think of you, I think of that TV show called Mad Men. I'm sure you must have watched it. You must have watched it several times.
Oh yeah, loved it.
It really is about how they synthesize messaging to create demand, to use advertising to create demand, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing that Don Draper, the John Hamm character, was so amazing at. And whatever amalgam of people he's based on from the 60s was so amazing at was that they were able to say, what's the customer's story? What's the customer's pre-existing story that already is in progress? Because that customer is in the middle of their story, right? They're living a life, they're having a business, they're doing whatever they're doing. Instead of coming in and saying, hey, customer, listen to my story, as a business owner, you go, I'm going to insert my product or service into your story and then tell what that story looks like.
Right.
You know, and he did that famous scene from Mad Men when he talks about the carousel, the Kodak slide carousel.
Right.
And he makes it all about preserving your memories or you know, enhancing your life so you can relive your moments or something, whatever it was.
Right.
That was him doing what still eludes a lot of business people this many years afterwards. And yeah, you're right. You're right. Absolutely right. They're terrible at elevator pitches, although everybody tries to come up with one.
Right.
They're usually bad at them because they do one of two things. Either they're way too technical too fast, or they're really generic and sound like everybody else's.
So I remember when you taught the class, you said, look, here's a good one-line pitch that a lawyer created that probably none of us would have come up with, which is, if the glove don't fit, you must acquit. And, you know, I thought about that, and it did resonate with me that they did collapse that ginormous 3 or 4 month trial into one line that really did capture the entire case in one line. It really
and it rhymed. Yeah.
And it rhymed as well. I mean, you have to give them a little credit for that, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the classics of all time. And because it's a classic of all time, if you tried to do it again now, you'd probably fail because you just sound like you're trying to do what they did.
Right.
The beauty of that one was that it was complicated and there was enough gray area and room for doubt and all kinds of stuff that he was able to say, look, it all hinges on this. And it was like, if this, then this, and the then this part was an action they could take.
Right.
So it was, he really captured a lot in that little phrase, whether he was trying to do that or not, who knows, but he managed to do the most brilliant thing ever with that phrase, you know?
So the reason I brought that up is because I do think, in a way, very few lawyers are Johnny Cochran. Unfortunately, he died at a relatively young age. I knew him when I was at UCLA Law School. He was a adjunct lecturer there. And he was a thin basketball player. And he would show up mainly to play basketball with the rest of us in the law school because he enjoyed playing basketball. But he got rights to do a lecture so that he would get a free parking pass or something. We're talking about UCLA in the 1970s. So it goes way back. The Vietnam War was still going on. It's a good story. But when you think about, like, how do you capture that kind of statement? Because you do it. I think you could have done that for Johnny Cochran in that case. Whenever I think of that phrase, I say to myself, Dave Mann could do it. And by the way, at one point when I was watching this case involving the Chauvin trial, I thought, well, maybe the defense lawyers need David Mann.
Well, I wouldn't help them just on principle, but I watched all of the openings and that interminable closing thing. It was all day, you know. Yes. Especially the defense just rambled on and on and on. In fact, I thought maybe the defense in that instance, he was actually trying to be complicated on purpose. Like he was trying to make it, because all he needed was reasonable doubt. So he was kind of like, well, let's just make all kinds of things sound doubtful. That could have been his strategy, actually. But in terms of simplicity, no way. He was nowhere near simplicity.
Right. I was wondering what you would have done with that case. I won't challenge you. I'll just have you think about it in a future podcast. I may want to ask you, what would you have done with that case? But right now, let's just focus on, you've rebranded your company to Simple Messaging.
Yeah.
So you're really saying to people, I know this world is really complicated, and you either have a story you're trying to tell as a product or a service or in a trial. And I notice you do work from your LinkedIn. I notice you do work even for tax lawyers that have to present tax cases, which usually are very, very complicated.
Oh, the securities exchange? Yeah.
And even tax. There's a guy on there that gave you a review that said, me and my team have tax cases, and we go to David Mann to help us simplify our presentation to the tax court. I mean, that's a real sort of statement of credibility for you. But what's the process? Like, what do you do? How do you get that creative moment when you see a massive information? Because I imagine you must watch a lot of commercials on TV and say, that's awful. Like, I could do far better in 5 minutes. But when you're dealing with a legal case or you're dealing with a business client, there's a lot more that you have to do to actually sort of get your arms around the problem, right? What's your process? How do you do it?
Well, they're all different, but basically there's sort of two things that I'm going to do, which is I'm going to look for where's the human character that we can follow. And that's the number one thing you have to do. Where's the human being that we can follow and kind of have that human character be an avatar for ourselves and our own feelings. Now, in something really simple, I've worked on 1 million personal injury cases from plaintiff side or medical malpractice from plaintiff side. They're pretty straightforward. This person got injured, Where it gets a little more dicey is when you have to be defense on one of those cases, and you got to figure out, how are we going to make this insurance company be a human being, right, or this massive corporation be a human being? And it's by what you do is you either find the human being that they can follow. So it could be the CEO or some key person, or it can be that you give the corporation this monolithic entity human characteristics. You give it something like, they made choices based on principles. They value this and they chose to do this based on those values. So that's giving it a grounding in a story of a person, even if it isn't literally a person. Juries really need that. So that's the first thing, find the character. Mm-hmm. And the second thing is get into the weeds on all of this technical stuff. So if it's taxes or if it's securities, I worked on the fifth largest civil suit in the history of the country, the Petrobras scandal. And there was a lot of financial complexity to that. There's a lot of financial complexity in a med mal case. And you got to get into that and go, now, they're going to eventually need to understand this with the real terminology. But you can't introduce the real terminology first, and you can't just throw them in the deep end in this stuff. You've got to give them an overview first. So really, like, can you summarize basically what happened in like 3 sentences in plain language, and then give them a medium-size overview next, which is like, now we're going to just do a little bit more flesh on the bones, but we're still not going to get too deeply in the weeds. By that point, they should have a pretty good grasp of the heart of it. And then you introduce the real terminology and the real complexity. This is, of course, while they're following a character through this whole thing.
Right.
And if you can balance all of that at the same time, and to boot, do most of that in the first 2 to maybe 3 minutes of your opening, you're probably going to have them. And you're probably going to be leagues beyond whoever the opposing counsel is, because they probably haven't done any of that stuff.
So do you have a bias for wanting to do plaintiffs' cases because there's usually more of a human than defense cases? Or do you say, I'll do either side?
I will do either side because they both have their own independent challenges.
Right.
Plaintiffs' cases is kind of where I started with this. So they, right, and because they're just more ready-made for storytelling.
Right.
Usually, not always, but usually. But lately, I've been called more and more to do defense. I just engaged with the U.S. Marines to do a thing, and the SEC again, and all of that stuff is not exactly your straightforward plaintiff cases. They're other things. So I like the challenge, and I did it on plaintiff side. I did a big, huge, really complex defamation case that actually was in California, or the lawyer was in California.
Okay.
And it took us days to figure out how we were going to tell this complex story that spanned like a decade of stuff,
Right. And
when we got it, we really got it. And she took that thing to mediation and it had a really strong showing. Now the defense side was really brutal on her. and it's still not over. But still, it made a much stronger impression than it would have had we not made the story clear.
But you were getting this case after it was already filed, after the pleadings were done, kind of really a lot of the work had already gone into whatever was in the file. I presume you would rather hear about the problem before the lawsuit is even filed, so you can get the themes created in the original papers, right? If you
ideally, yeah. But they usually don't think to call somebody like me at that stage. Well, I'm working on it.
Right. You probably get cases where it's like a month before trial or a month before the mediation, and the lawyer's like, I don't know how to get this organized, and I don't have a thematic statement for it, and I don't know if I'll capture everyone's attention, and they're kind of pulling their hair out, right?
Yeah, but what has happened in the last couple of years, cases are getting stayed, cases are just getting delayed from COVID, cases are I'm still in the middle of a case that was supposed to go to trial like a year and a half ago, and it just keeps getting kicked down the road, so that gives us more opportunity to get in and redo the story.
Right.
And, but the earlier I can get involved, the more I can get into helping them with the deposition questions and everything, so that you're already kind of targeting a story that you want,
right,
before you ever even ask the questions. So that's ideal.
Do you ever imagine getting a case where there's been a mock trial already, or there's been a focus group already, and they've got some feedback from ordinary jurors, and they're convinced that they need to sharpen the storyline that was presented, because the storyline that went in was maybe too convoluted or too many facts, or, sometimes a lawsuit can be like a kitchen sink. There's all sorts of pots and pans and stuff that's thrown in, and no one's simplifying it to what's the essential thing that we need to have dinner here, as opposed to having a messy kitchen.
Right. Well, it's funny you should say, because I just got brought on to a kind of a huge personal injury case in Pennsylvania that'll go to trial in September. And I just got this last week.
Right.
And so he's still in the process of sending me stuff, but he said, look, this is such a big deal that we've already had at least one, I think maybe two focus groups.
Okay.
And so he says, what we can do is we can send you summaries of some of the case file stuff, but we're going to send you the focus group data. So we can
the actual videotapes of the focus group commentary, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that sort of thing. I think he's actually already sent me some of that. And whatever data they have on which pieces of the story have resonated the most, which pieces have been confusing.
Right.
And so that's just gold. When I worked on Petrobras, of course, that was ended up being a $3 billion settlement, but still it's huge.
Right.
But we did one focus. We were intending to do more than one focus group, but we only got one before that got stayed and all this stuff happened. But we did use that, that I did watch a jury deliberate. It was actually two juries that we deliberated. They had watched them deliberate, and you see, like, oh my God, they're not tracking anything they just heard.
Right.
You think they are, but they're not.
Right. See, that's the black box that a lot of lawyers. First of all, you never learn this in law school. Even if you have a trial advocacy class, they rarely hold a mock trial or rarely hold something with jurors. Number two, when you start trying cases, you usually don't get access to the jurors for enough time to find out what worked, what didn't work,
right?
Why were you effective? Why were you not effective? I mean, sometimes you luck out and you get jurors that want to spend time. Most of them just want to get out of there. They really don't want to talk to the lawyers. They feel like they've been kind of squeezed dry for minimum pay. It's less than minimum wage for what amount they receive in both state court. So there's really very little feedback loop unless you do your own little private mock trials, which a lot of lawyers don't do because they don't feel organized enough to even do that. So in some ways, here's the punchline to the question. In the ideal case, wouldn't it be best to have someone like you help sharpen the story and then do the focus group when you have what might be the sharpened story? Or do you think doing it backwards is okay?
What you just described is for sure the ideal. Now, you know, the bill for all that gets pretty astronomical. So the case, I mean, not me, but in addition to me, there'd be this whole focus group, this whole team, and all this research that would cost a lot of money. So the case would have to be worth it. You know, it'd have to be at tens of millions of dollars probably ultimately. But yes, absolutely. No, what I'd want to do is I'd want to put together, I mean, I come from theater, you know, so it's like what you do is you workshop, you revise. I mean, a good theater has a week or two of previews before they open. Commercial theater has months and even a year of previews before they open. So you have to think of it as it's all a matter of trial and error. You're going to do the best you can on the first one. You're going to take the data from how it landed with the audience and you're going to incorporate that into the next one. And if you can do 3 or 4 of those before trial, you are going to be killer at trial. It's going to be so road tested and so, you know, dialed in. It's just a matter of, do you want to spend the time and effort on it, really? You know,
but it becomes very rarefied air to be able to do that kind of preparation, because a lot of cases just don't have that set of economics. I mean, if you look at the massive cases that are filed in the state or federal courts, civil cases, usually the amount of controversy is less than $1 million for 90% of the cases. I mean, 25% of the cases that are in Los Angeles right now are American with Disability Act cases having damages of less than $25,000.
Wow. Yeah.
Think about that. The judges are overwhelmed with these cases involving people saying, oh, you know, the parking didn't have the blue picture of the wheelchair. It wasn't no, I mean, literally, it's at that level. It's at the level of, you know, you see these lower counters at certain places because that's for people with wheelchairs. I have nothing against that, but to imagine the massive lawsuits that are going through the civil system right now.
Yeah.
And they're for small dollars. And because they can be automated by these lawyers that file these cases routinely using word processing of the same storyline, same plaintiff. There was one plaintiff recently in a case that I was defending. He had like something like 6,000 cases pending. Who do you know as a plaintiff that sues 6,000 different defendants? I mean, that's pretty shocking to me, but that's his business. Basically enforcing the American with Disabilities Act. So the reason I bring this up, because I think to myself, those plaintiffs' lawyers have enough cases where they literally probably could get pretty good because they're doing this over and over again. But the defense side, the defendants are, you know, all over the place. It's not like just one law firm does the defense of all these cases. So it's like a very expensive thing to do. And therefore, most of these cases settle. But it's a little bit like, you know, protection money. You have to pay because, you know, you screwed up your parking space, or you screwed up your counter, or you did something wrong. But when you get a case like that, do you say, look, you can't afford my time? That's a small case, right?
I mean, they wouldn't even ask me if it was that small of a case, you know. So they're only gonna want to put in the effort if they're you know, if the output of money is going to be minuscule compared to what they're going to bring in. But I would put out, though, I would say lawyers who are in that kind of a situation where they're constantly in court for tiny little things, what they really need is a template that they can follow. They don't need a consultant every single time, but they need to have access to a way of doing it that makes it efficient for them. They can learn and then do on their, I mean, this is stuff that I teach too in my programs.
Right.
They can learn on their own and get a sense of how to just have a way to make the language simpler and a way to make the delivery more efficient and more confident, and just be able to sort of like maximize the practice of having to go to court every single week or something, maximize what they're getting out of that by just knowing what they're doing and not just having it be spitballing it every single time, So that's, another thing.
When you look at business people, do they actually have you write speeches for them? Like how far do they go in using your services on the
I just finished doing a big, huge event for a huge global pharmaceutical in the capacity as an executive speechwriter, which I only do once in a while. It has to be a pretty big event for me to come in and do that. Cause it's a lot of work,
right.
and you have to really be patient with them because they never have any time. They never have any attention span. They kind of want to do it themselves, except not do any of it themselves. I mean,
right. And then they
sort of
screw up the delivery, right? And then they screw up the delivery on you, right? It must drive you crazy.
I mean, now this last year, it's all been, we're getting geared up for our virtual presentation that no one's ever done before because this conference every year has always been live, but this year we have to do it virtually. So you got to work with them on how do you look at the camera and everything. But generally, that's a completely different type of proposition where they want to communicate a message to their sales. It's almost usually the executives to the sales team. And they want to know, they want to get it as clear as possible. But, sometimes you can lead a horse to water, I can show them exactly what to do and they still won't do it. But I do try. And when they will let me write it all for them and will actually do what I wrote, then it works. It totally works. But it's a leap of faith for them to trust that what I wrote is going to capture it right. Lawyers tend to trust me on that, but not the executives.
But you must have to do a lot of hand-holding with the business people per se. I think the lawyers are probably more willing to be sort of take your advice. But I would imagine business people, you have to really do a lot of hand-holding, right?
Yeah, the biggest difference is that you can see, you got my webpage up here.
Yeah, I put your webpage up because I want to make sure you get some marketing and advertising out of this because you'll be able to link to this podcast. And I do want to do part 2 where we maybe drill down on the Chauvin case.
That'd be amazing.
A few videos because I saw a lot of stuff in that case that I thought totally would backfire on both sides.
Yeah.
And I was thinking to myself as I was watching it, man, I got to call David up and find out whether he agrees with me or disagrees with me because you could do a whole NIDA course on the Chauvin case. I mean, that's a tough case, right? That's a really tough case.
And it was right. It was happening right down the street.
Right.
And the actual crime, the actual killing of George Floyd happened 3 blocks from my girlfriend's house. It's a corner I've passed 1,000 times.
Oh, the Cup Bakery. What is it called?
Well, Cup Foods, which we all made fun of because there's a big, huge local chain called Cub Foods.
Right.
And for some reason, this one little rinky-dink corner store called itself Cup Foods. And we thought it was hilarious until it became really not hilarious, But anyway, what you've got up on the screen here is my business site. There's a second site for lawyers, which we can look at in a second. But this one, the main difference generally between business people and lawyers.
Yes.
Lawyers know that words will make or break them.
Yes.
The words matter so much that they will either win or lose. They either succeed or fail on the words.
Right.
Business people don't always think that way. They tend to think of like, however I get the money is what I want to do. And sometimes the words are part of that. And sometimes the words have basically nothing to do with that. I try to turn their attention and go, if you adjust your words in your marketing and in your sales presentations and in your internal communications between, leadership and everybody else, you're going to see results that you're going to like, but it's hard. It's a harder sell to get them to understand that and pay attention to it.
Do you think that's because business people think, the product sells itself. Like there's a certain aspect to it where they say the product just sells itself. Like your point that's
all the time
about us, right? They just think, no, it's not simplicity. It's just the product sells itself. We don't have to do anything. The product just sells itself, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you sell, like, say you have, like, you're a roofing company, and all your homepage really needs to say is, we do roofing. So if anybody needs a new roof on their house, they know to call you if you're like the cheapest and best people to work with, or somebody knows them. It doesn't make much difference what your message is.
Right.
But the thing is that a lot of professional services are not as simple as that.
Right.
And so it comes down to, you can't just say, we do financial services, because people go, well, yeah, but what financial service? And then as soon as you begin to explain what you do, it's too confusing or it's too generic. If you start just saying, getting into the minutia of the financial, they'll go like, I'm lost and I don't know, is this going to serve me or not? Or if you try to make it simple yourself, you might go, we provide solutions so you can maximize your bottom line. And well, now you sound like everybody, and it still doesn't say anything. So that it's really in error that they think that the product's going to sell itself, you know?
Right. So let's go through your services just for a second, because I think you're great at what you do, but I think it's hard to describe what you do.
Go on the homepage. Actually, that's probably better. I've adjusted a lot of this.
Where should I go? Back here?
Just up there. Yeah, go up there.
Here?
And and then just scroll down this one.
Okay. Because I think it's hard to describe what you do. Oh, there you are. So you're right there.
It's right there. So, well, here, stop for a second.
Yes.
You've got an amazing company and you know what you want to communicate, but you're struggling to find the right words and losing customers because of it. So that's intentionally put there that way, because that's intentionally meant to go, are you this company that where you're struggling with the words? And then the next thing is how I help you solve that problem, build a bridge to your ideal client. And then there's those 5 things there. Your differentiating idea, messages that resonate, confidence with your words, quit losing customers and stop wasting money. So those are some of the benefits that you get. Then if you scroll a little, then this video actually is me talking about that stuff. And then this is the framework. So right here is what I would do with customer or clients that come to me to work on this. And it's explained in my video here. But it's like, what we're going to do is we're going to first identify who your customer really is. And I mean a niche, like somebody who's like a specific type of customer with a specific type of mindset. You're like Seth Godin, the marketing guru, says, you're not going to be the next Amazon. You're not going to be the next Nike. So just stop it and just zero in on who you really do serve. So that actually is a psychological thing, exercise that I do with people to define who their customer is. Then we define who you are. Now that we've thought about who you're trying to aim for, who really are you as a company? What do you really have that's different? Not what you want to believe is different, but what's going to serve that particular customer. Okay, so it makes you truly unique. Then we look at what's the idea that's going to resonate with that customer. This like, I always use Wheaties as an example. They could have said anything they wanted to sell a box of bran flakes, right? But they went with breakfast of champions.
Right.
That's an idea. That's an interesting idea. Now we're all used to it now. But what they've done is they've turned their brand into something that is associated with making you a better athlete.
Right.
Now, most of us are not athletes, but most of us are hobbyists. We want to be like in shape. We want to be, like we're talking about biking.
Right.
They grabbed a hold of a cool idea. And then my 4th thing here, they put it into 3 words, breakfast of champions.
Right.
And so how can you take your cool idea? I'm going to make you a better athlete with my cereal, and put it into some cool, succinct words. And those are the 4 stages that I work with people on to get, and it's not always going to produce like a breakfast of champions tagline, just to be clear. That's not really the goal. The goal is to get it to be the words you actually need. So it might be a homepage thing. Right. It might be a profile on LinkedIn. It might be a billboard ad It might be a series. I just worked with a furniture company, and we came up with like a whole list of a unified idea, but they're all slightly different messages that can go on a billboard campaign. So a whole bunch of messages that are all centered around one idea of them being, your dream come true. So that's the idea there.
But you're like you're doing this as a solo person. I mean, there are a lot of people that would say, don't you have to have like 50 people and a company and a ginormous number of storyboard artists? And I mean, the reason I like working with you, and I have worked with you, and I will work with you in the future for sure, is because you do the work and you don't just delegate it to some gig economy subcontractor. No. You're kind of a very capable, hands-on guy. But when you look at like someone looking at what you do would probably say, can you do all those things for some company that's totally confused about why it even exists, and then give it a new campaign and maybe a new lease on life?
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that. I probably should have a little bit more of a staff, but at this point, what I'm really good at doing is getting people to think more clearly about what they do.
Right.
So the process that I'm going to go through with them is going to produce the things that are in the boxes underneath where it says this part produces they are going to produce this themselves. They're going to do a lot of this. I'm going to guide them through how to like come up with this.
Right.
So that their thinking and their mindset is clarified and more on point. Then they find people to do all this. They find the web designer and they find the copywriters to kind of magnify all of the stuff that we have just come up with. But my position is to be at the outset.
Right.
Like we were just talking about lawyers, like as early as possible to get like the story to be clear. And then it's a matter of just revising and magnifying it for the public, Right.
See, I've always thought as a lawyer, when you hear that first interview with the client, I mean, the very, very first, they haven't even hired you yet. They're pouring their heart out to tell you the story, whatever the story is. It could be an antitrust case. It could be a patent infringement. It could be a trademark infringement. It could be a million different things. They're telling you the story. You haven't even been hired yet. In my opinion, if you could actually, with permission, record that original story with all the emotion that it's being told for the first time, because they're dying to tell you as the lawyer that story, and you could somehow capture that video, audio, however it can be captured, and send that to you and say, David, this is the story, but I want to give you what I could see the 15 different defenses are going to be. Tell me what you think is going to resonate here and where you think it's going to have some traction for landing with a judge, jury, appellate court, and so on, arbitrator, mediator, million different audiences that you eventually see in the progress of a case. I think that's the ultimate sort of approach, which unfortunately no one ever does, because at the very first consultation, no one's recording anything. Everyone's just listening, trying to decide, should I take this case? Does this guy seem honest? Is he going to pay my bill? A million different things. And they're not actually focusing on, hey, this is the story. This is the most original version of that story that you're going to hear the very first time, or hopefully the very first time.
Well, I'll tell you,
by the lawyers.
There is a way around that problem, though.
Yeah.
Which is that the lawyer so assume the lawyer takes the case, right? Mm-hmm. So the lawyer has now heard that. No, they haven't recorded it, but mentally they have somewhere they've heard it and they reacted to it, Right. Then they're going to go into discovery, and they're going to do all this stuff, and all this lawyer machinations are going to happen and all that stuff. And then they're going to come to me too late in the game, but still. Okay. And what I do usually is they're going to write it out for me, and it's going to be stilted and bad. Okay. And I'm going to ask them about it, and it's going to be stilted and bad because they're going to be in lawyer head. But we get them in a conference room and we let a few hours of this happen.
Right.
And then they get a little bit more raw. Okay. And I continually keep asking that lawyer about, okay, yeah, but tell me more about this. And they will start to loosen up, and they will go right to like their version of what they heard that day. Okay. And that's what I start to write down. Once they are not trying to make a product, they're just talking about it. They're going to then say the stuff that we need. And then the other thing is, and usually they don't let me do this, but I love it when they do, is to actually work with the witnesses sometimes. I'll get to go in there and just be like, okay, let's talk about what happened. And then they'll be all stilted and everything. And I'll help guide them to, no, tell the story this way. And I'll say, that thing you just said right there, say that again. That was cool. That was awesome. Like, write that down. That's the kind of thing you need to say more of. And just, get it to be repeatable without having to actually record it, What
I say to my associates as I train them, that first meeting is so unbelievably valuable. And if you're not listening with both ears totally open, all antennae out, every little nuance, and you're not picking up on, is the jury going to find this plaintiff worthy? Is the jury going to find this defendant credible?
Yeah.
You're not being a lawyer.
No, I mean, they have to find.
You are not being a lawyer. And they look at me like, oh, really? And I'm like, they don't teach us in law school, but this is actually what's important for the evaluation of whether you can win this case or not, and whether you can give a service or not.
I mean, here's the thing. I've been talking a lot about Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow.
Yes.
Which everybody should read. It's huge and dense, but you got to read it because it's for both sides of what I do, business people and for lawyers, but it's particularly relevant to lawyers, even though none of the book is about lawyers. But it's about how people need to make snap decisions because it's a survival thing. We can't be going in a grocery store and making like calculated decisions on every jar of spaghetti sauce. I mean, you'd go completely nuts.
Right.
So you have to have a way of dealing with like snap, snap, snap. But the thing is that in a court of law, you have to go into system 2 where it's a slower way of thinking. It's more calculated and more considered.
Yes.
But the problem is the jury doesn't, no human being really wants to go there, but the lawyer is already there, and the system 2 stuff, the complicated stuff, is now familiar to them, and it's easy for them, and they think it's just supposed to be easy for everybody.
Right.
So I'm like, if you don't have if you have a witness who might say all the right stuff, but is going to come across as unappealing for some reason or confusing, like one of these guys in the Petrobras case was so confusing. Well, the jury system 1 goes, nope, can't understand, don't like, and they just start shutting out everything.
Right.
And then you're losing.
Yes.
So totally believe that.
So David, we've got to do part 2 that focuses more on the lawyers than the business people, because we probably gave more of this to the business people, which is okay.
Yeah.
But tell people, and there are business people that listen to the podcast, how would they reach you best? Because you're a busy guy, but you do occasionally take on new clients if you're looking up. How would they reach you? What's the best approach? Email, phone, all the above?
Yeah, and are you talking about the business people or lawyers or anybody?
Well, anyone, but I think business people in the first instance, because more of this podcast was about business people. And we'll do the lawyer stuff maybe the next time.
Yeah, well, just to end cap that and to turn it around to businesses, it's all the same as far as I'm concerned. I do business and lawyers and theater. And all 3 of them have to do with engaging people as quickly and as deeply or lastingly as possible. And so if you're a business owner and you might think, well, I'm not a lawyer, so what does this have to do with me? Well, it's the same thing. Those jurors are just like clients.
Yes,
the prospective clients.
Yes,
and you as a business owner or as a business entity or as a marketing director or whatever it is, You are the lawyer, and you have to get your story across to those jurors or prospective clients, get them engaged viscerally and emotionally as fast as possible. And today it's a matter of seconds in social media.
Right.
That has to, so there's really not that much difference. So as terms of getting a hold of me, go to my website that Jack just showed you is asimplemessage.com.
Right.
You can basically just look at the homepage and it'll lead you right to where you need to be. A lot of the rest of the site is being reevaluated because I've simplified my own way of working with people, and I'm working on getting that. But the homepage is all completely done. And then and you can get some videos there, some resources. My contact information is david@asimplemessage.com, and just, send me an email and let's talk.
Yeah.
I'll talk to anybody.
No, you're great at what you do. You do it relatively inexpensively compared to the way I've seen it done. I don't want to trash anyone, but I've seen it done as a ginormous production, which, I sort of resist because you do get a certain sort of, you get kind of a consensus approach from like 5 or 6 different people. It's not really focused. It tends to not be sharp. It definitely will not be as witty as what you'll produce because you're tuned into the alliteration of the words. You actually get that if the glove don't fit, you must acquit carries a certain poetry with it. And you're going to, if it's there, you'll find it. And when you find it, you'll say, this is it. This is it. This is the goal. This is the point that has to really land. And you're very clear and very specific about saying it. And it's no sort of 6 other people saying, no, and just confusing the story even more. So I think it has to be one-on-one in the way you do it. So I want to congratulate you on your approach to this, because I think you do something extremely well that very few people can do. And frankly, I think any lawyer that has you on their side has a huge edge up in any business that does as well. So we'll do another one of these that focuses more on the lawyer side, but I think doing this one on the business side is great. Thanks for your time. I love it, David. Thanks very much. I'll send you the link once it goes to publication.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jack.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.